This is the Chris Berry Show. Expert information on wealth, estate, and tax planning for the second half of life. Information that you can understand. Here's your host, Chris Berry.
Welcome to the show, everybody. Of course, this is Chris Berry, and we start the show every week with a positive focus, something positive that happened in the previous week. And this week, positive focus was going to church with my kids and wife, and just seeing the differences in how two children raised the same, 2 years apart, boy and girl, can be so different. My daughter, Madison, she's age 6, and it's cute. She's like very independent, always going up to people, very friendly, just like a little ball of joy. And so a lot of times at church, me, my son Ryan, and my wife Rochelle will sit together. And my daughter Madison, she always wants to be in front. She's really one of these joiners in life, it seems like. And so when we're singing, she's always singing super loud, where we're on the other side of the church and we can hear her. We were singing Lean On Me as one of the songs this past week. And, of course, we could hear her. My son, he doesn't want to stand up. He's a little bit more shy. But when we sat down after singing, he even whispered in my ear, like, everyone can hear Maddie. And I thought it was pretty cute. And then as part of church, we're talking about some other things and biases some people have, whether religious or race bias, or maybe you've experienced a bias. And my daughter was willing to go up in front of the whole church and got a little scared as she was walking up there. But she mentioned how mom sometimes texts too long while they're waiting to leave in the car. So apparently she has a little bit of a technology bias. But it was cute watching her interact and getting up in front of people and not being shy at all. So that was my positive focus. And like I said, we like to start the show on a positive focus each week because it really sets the stage for positivity, which is something that I'm all about. And so this week, what I plan on doing on the show is talk about what I call the 5 pillars of a sound retirement plan. So there's 5 things that truly make up a holistic plan, which is something that we focus on at the firm. And then in our third segment, we're going to get into some of the questions and answers that we have received. So if you do have any questions that you want us to read on air and answer, you can always email us at 810-355-2584, or you can email us at askchris@thechrisberryshow.com. And then if you do want to ask these questions live and in person at one of our weekly workshops, we invite you to do that, but you're going to have to register. So this upcoming week, we're going to be in Ann Arbor this Thursday, April 11th at 2 p.m. at our Ann Arbor office. And then on Wednesday, April 10th, we're going to be at our Livonia office. So Wednesday, April 10th at 6 p.m. So one of our rare evening workshops. It's going to be Livonia, Wednesday, April 10th at 6 p.m. And what we do is we talk about wealth, estate, and tax planning for the second half of life, and we break it into 3 easy steps in these workshops. So we do invite you to attend. If you do want to attend, again, you're going to have to RSVP because space is limited. You can call us at 810-355-2584, or you can email us, or you can go online at thechrisberryshow.com, click through, and there'll be a spot where you can register. So this week, I wanted to talk about the 5 pillars of a sound retirement plan. And really what these make up are the principles of what we call holistic planning, which is what we do. And so those 5 principles are first, legacy planning. Think of this as the estate plan. Think of this as creating your own rule book versus relying on the government's rule book. And then we have income planning, ensuring your expenses can be paid month to month. We have investment planning, tax planning, and then healthcare planning. And what I thought I would do is break each of these individual pillars, each of these individual areas, break it down in a little bit more detail. So first, we'll start with legacy planning. Now, you might think it's kind of odd to start with the ends, but it's important to begin with the end in mind. So I want to cover legacy planning. So it's important to make sure that any assets that you've worked hard for go to your beneficiaries instead of to taxes or probate or long-term care costs. And that's why having a proper estate plan, a legacy plan, is important, because what you're doing with that estate plan is you're creating your own rule book. And this is really a guide for the rest of those other pieces. It's the foundation of any type of planning is the legal documents. Because if you don't have these in place, then you could be relying on the government's rulebook. By creating a comprehensive estate plan, you're creating your own rulebook versus leaving it up to the government. Because the government has this process called probate. And with probate, there's probate while you're alive as well as probate upon death. So, for example, if you were to get a knock on your head and you hadn't put together your own rulebook, you hadn't put together a financial power of attorney document, you haven't put together a medical power of attorney document, you haven't done a personal care plan, then instead of following your own rules, the government's going to be making decisions for you. And most people don't want to leave things up to the government. And this can take one of two forms. This can take the form of probate while alive, in the form of guardianships and conservatorships, or it could be probate upon death. That's where you have to go through a 5-month probate process because the asset was left in your name. So most people want to avoid this, and this is how we create that estate plan or that legacy plan, by utilizing certain tools, things like a financial power of attorney document. And that's a document that appoints someone to make financial decisions. A medical power of attorney document, appointing someone to make medical decisions for you. A personal care plan, which is a document that gives instructions to your financial and medical power of attorney on how best to care for you if you're unable to care for yourself. So financial power of attorney, medical power of attorney, personal care plan, those are what we call disability documents. So it's very important to have those in place. And with those in place, you can avoid the living probate, the guardianships and conservatorships, where the court is making decisions for you. And then in addition to the living probate, we also need to avoid probate upon death. Make sure that your money goes to the people, places, individuals, charities that you want versus letting the courts decide where your assets go upon death. And so probate upon death, we need to understand that there's 4 ways that assets transfer out of your name upon death. First would be joint ownership. So we have husband and wife joint on a checking account. Wife passes away, it goes to the husband. Second would be a beneficiary designation. So we might have a life insurance, a 401k, IRA. You've named someone as a beneficiary, it passes to whoever you've named, thereby avoiding probate. Third, we might have a trust, and we have different types of trusts. We have revocable living trusts that avoid probate and can control the distribution. And then we also have asset protection trusts that avoid probate, control the distribution, but now build in asset protection. And understand that if an asset doesn't pass through joint ownership, beneficiary designation, trust, then it ends up going into probate. And that's that court process that, again, we want to avoid that because in Michigan, that's a 5-month process where you have inventory fees, filing fees, publication fees, and sometimes attorney fees all inside of that. So understand that by understanding how estate administration works, you can avoid probate. So you have to rely on joint ownership, beneficiary designation, or a trust to avoid probate. So again, when we're talking about legacy planning, what we're talking about is creating that comprehensive estate plan, having things like a trust and a pour-over will, financial power of attorney, medical powers of attorney. Then legacy planning is more than just talking about where your stuff goes upon death. We're also talking about protecting assets for the next generation. So do we want it to go outright to those kids, or do we want to look at maybe protecting those beneficiaries from their own financial immaturity? So, for example, minor children, like I mentioned on the show previously, I have a daughter who's 6 and a son who's 8. I don't want money going outright to them, so I need to protect against that financial immaturity. So instead, what we can do is we can say it goes outright to them at certain ages, maybe a third at 25, increased to a half at age 30, and then the remainder at 35. That's one way of doing things. So with the idea that we're protecting them and someone else manages the money for that time, because you worked hard for this money, you don't want to see it lost to financial immaturity. And then the second thing is we can build in a lifetime or the opportunity for a lifetime of asset protection for our beneficiaries. We can stretch out those IRAs. For example, let's say you have some tax-deferred money. Well, what happens when you turn 70 and a half? You have to start taking out required minimum distributions. And then what happens when you pass away? you leave that to your beneficiaries. And if you've named them outright, then they might take all that money and pay all the income tax all in one fell swoop. Versus maybe you want to look at stretching out the IRA or protecting that IRA or those qualified accounts from being fully taxable at your death, instead allowing them to stretch it out over their lifetime. And with a trust, you can control those distributions. So you could force your children or even grandchildren to stretch out those retirement accounts over their lifetime. So instead of paying all the income tax at once, they can stretch it out over their lifetime. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about legacy planning. And I think it's important to start there because that estate plan, it's really the rule book. And you want to rely on your own set of rules versus relying on the government's rule book. So you want to be able to create your own rule book, and that's where legacy planning is the first pillar of a sound, holistic retirement plan. So far we've covered legacy planning. The next step is to create an income plan. So this is going to be your plan of how are you going to cover your expenses to ensure you can get to that legacy plan. So income planning is really looking at your expenses, how your expenses are going to be paid each month with reliability and predictability for the rest of your life. So this includes things like Social Security maximization, looking at your income and expenses, making sure that we're covering inflation, and then also covering for what happens if one spouse passes away, so building in that spousal protection. So with income planning, let's dive a little bit deeper into this. And with income planning, we like to put together what we call a bucket plan, with the idea that we break your income needs into different buckets based on the time frame from when you're going to need that income or utilize that income. And so we break it into 3 different buckets. And the first bucket is what's called our now bucket. So this is the amount of money that we need over the next year. So if we're retired, this might cover our income need because we might have an income gap between the amount of expenses we have versus now that we're retired, we don't have a wage coming in. So that creates an income gap. So we might have an income need for that first year. In addition to that income need, we need to have some planned expenses inside of there. So things like if you know that you're going to take a big trip, if you're planning on fixing the roof, well, that should be in your now bucket, and that money should be safe, liquid, available. And then have a comfort fund or emergency fund. So if something were to happen, you weren't expecting the furnace to go, but now you need to replace the furnace, that would come out of your emergency or comfort fund. So all of that money should be safe, liquid, typically sitting in checking, savings, etc. And then the later bucket of money, that's our later income needs. So this is money that we plan on utilizing maybe in the future, maybe 10 years from now. And typically this is geared for growth. Maybe this is where we're planning for long-term care. This is maybe where we're talking about that legacy for a spouse, making sure that that spouse isn't completely impoverished when one spouse passes away. And this money can be invested a little bit more aggressively, typically. And then the important thing, and this is where a lot of people kind of miss out, is that they don't have a soon bucket. So money that they're going to need sooner rather than later. So this is money maybe over the next 10 years. So we have our now bucket that covers this year, but then what about next year and the year after, next 5 or 10 years? So we want to make sure that we've invested that money maybe a little bit more conservatively, because this is money that we're going to draw on to cover our income. Because we need to be careful with what's called sequence of return risk, where if all of a sudden the market goes down and we have to draw that money out, we could be in a tough place. For example, if you remember 2008, if you had money invested in the market and you're looking at retiring right then, and your investments took a 40% cut, that could have a drastic effect on your retirement. So the idea is that this money that we're going to need over the next 5 to 10 years probably should be invested a little bit more conservatively than money that we're going to need in the future. Or even say you're younger, maybe you're planning for college for your children. The money that you're going to need to do that maybe should be invested a little bit more conservatively than the money that you're planning on utilizing at retirement, because you don't want to get to a year out of before you're going to have to pay college costs, and all of a sudden the market goes down. Instead of being able to pay for 4 years, now you can only pay for 2. There's things we can do in terms of managing volatility to try to protect against that happening. So that's kind of the first part of that income plan, is understanding that you should have your money maybe organized in buckets: money that you're going to need now, money that you're going to need over the next 10 years, and money that you might need later. And we have a good book on this topic. I actually wrote the foreword for it. So if you do want a copy, we have a book called The Bucket Plan, that for the first 5 callers to the show, if you leave your name and address, we'll mail out a free copy of that Bucket Plan book that walks individuals through this kind of income planning scenario. So if you do give us a call at 810-355-2584, or if you want to email us at askchris@thechrisberryshow.com with your name and address, for the first 5 individuals who call in or email us, we will send out a free copy of the Bucket Plan book, which is a guide for stress-free, worry-free retirement planning. Again, the Bucket Plan book for the first 5 individuals that call in. And then stick with us as we get into continuing our discussion on income planning, and we'll also cover investment planning, tax planning, and healthcare planning, and how all 5 of these really are the 5 pillars to a holistic, stress-free, comfortable retirement. So stick with us as we keep discussing income planning, and then in our third segment, we'll get into some of our questions and answers from our listeners.
The cost of care for an elderly loved one or a loved one with a chronic illness is shockingly expensive. If you are dealing with the unbelievable cost of care, make sure you get all the benefits you're entitled to. Here's certified elder law attorney Chris Berry from the Elder Care Firm in Brighton.
Most of my clients are really concerned about long-term care costs. They don't know where to turn, and what we can do is put together legal strategies to protect your resources and also bring in additional resources to help pay that cost of care. One of the things that they often say is that I wish I knew about this years prior. And unfortunately, the information's out there, but there's just so few certified elder law attorneys. As the only certified elder law attorney in Livingston County, it's my job to make sure that our seniors, our loved ones, our veterans have the best quality of care possible and the best quality of life possible.
Protect your hard-earned assets from probate, long-term care costs, and the IRS. The Elder Care Firm will get you the governmental benefits you deserve, including veterans benefits and Medicaid. Visit theeldercarefirm.com and schedule a free 15-minute phone consultation. That's theeldercarefirm.com.
Welcome back. So we're talking income planning as one of the 5 pillars of a sound retirement plan. First, we covered legacy planning, which is creating your own rulebook. Now we're talking about income planning. And we talked about the concept of a bucket plan, organizing your income needs in assets in a now bucket, a soon bucket, and a later bucket. Again, if you want some more information on that bucket plan concept, then what we'll do for the first 5 listeners of the show who email or call in, we'll send out a copy of that book. And again, the number is 810-355-2584. So in terms of income planning, also we look at Social Security maximization, and we've done whole shows on Social Security. But one of the important things is understanding that Social Security isn't married to your retirement date. For example, I'm working with a client right now who's planning on retiring, or actually just retired, and initially he was planning on taking Social Security right away just because that seemed like the thing to do, because your wages, your salary is gone. Where's your income going to come from? But one of the things we talked about was, and this gets into tax planning, which is another pillar of a sound retirement plan, but we talked about the idea that taxes are scheduled to go up, whether we like it or not, in 2025. And couple that with the fact that every year you delay taking Social Security, you're going to get basically an 8% raise. And so one of the strategies then is to maybe look at diffusing some of that tax time bomb existing in your IRAs and 401ks, because when you turn 70 and a half, you have to start drawing from those accounts. So one of the strategies would be to, now that we've retired, start taking income from those tax-deferred accounts. Pay the income tax now so that you can allow your Social Security to grow, so that by age 70 and a half, when you have to take out RMDs, you've accomplished two things. One, you've diffused that tax time bomb. And second, you've allowed your Social Security to grow at about 8% a year. So looking at Social Security maximization, one of the reports that we run for our clients is looking at how we can maximize the amount of Social Security they get. And it's based on a couple of factors like how long you've worked and also a variable of how long you think you're going to live. But one of the things that we can do is we can look at Social Security maximization for our clients. And then also we want to have a plan for inflation. Having a ton of money just sitting in the bank, we call that going broke safely, because cost of bread, cost of everything seems to go up. So we need to have a plan for that. And then also as part of income planning, we need to make sure that we're taking care of that surviving spouse if we have a married couple. If one spouse was the breadwinner, one spouse has the pension in their name, we need to make sure that if that spouse were to pass away, that surviving spouse is still taken care of. Because now one of the individual Social Security is going away, that pension potentially could go away. And then on top of that, you go from married filing jointly to now a single filing as it relates to taxes. So now we have a compressed tax rate, putting a lot of pressure on that surviving spouse. So we want to make sure that if one spouse were to pass away, we have a plan for that surviving spouse. So that's the second key pillar in a sound retirement. First one being legacy planning, the second one being income planning. Now, the third one is investment planning. So once your income plan is established, then it's important to create and implement an investment plan for the remaining assets that you do not need to draw from for month to month. So you're going to have certain assets that are pegged for your income, and that might be in your soon bucket, but now we need to have an investment plan maybe for that later bucket. And this is where we look at things like assessing your risk tolerance. So how much risk are you really willing to take on in your investments? How much volatility are you comfortable with? And then it's important to adjust your portfolio to reduce or eliminate fees as much as possible. A lot of people are surprised by the amount of fees they have in their different accounts. And the expense ratios of different mutual funds can vary widely. So it's important to look at reducing or eliminating fees as much as possible. And then also evaluate ways to reduce your risk while still accomplishing your goal. So everyone's risk tolerance is a little bit different. And the more risk you're willing to take on, typically the more return, but also kind of the more of a downside potentially. So just making sure that your investments are invested in a way that you're comfortable with that volatility. So we've talked about legacy planning. We've talked about income planning. We've talked about investment planning. Now we're going to spend some time talking about tax planning. And when we're talking about tax planning, you might have a CPA or a tax person, or you might work with H&R Block, but understand what they're doing is they're really just reporting on what happened in the previous year. What we're talking about is in any comprehensive retirement plan, it should include a strategy for addressing taxes. So this includes things like assessing the taxable nature of your current holding. So understanding that there's this concept called tax diversity, where we should have assets in different type of taxable classes. For example, and we've talked about this before on the show, is the order of money. Understanding that different assets, depending on their tax structure, can have different effects. So order of money. So you look at having free. First, we call what we call free money. So this is money that's just given to you, and this is in the form of employee match. So if you're still working and your employer matches something, then take the match. You always want to take that match. The second order of money would be tax-free money. So this is money that grows tax-free. So tax-free money would be things like Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks. This is money that you put in post-tax, but it grows tax-free. Also, 529s, HSAs, index universal life insurance. All of these forms of assets or asset classes grow tax-free. And then next we have taxable accounts. So this is like your checking account, your savings account, your brokerage account. This is post-tax money that when it grows, you have to look at things like capital gains tax. And then last, we have tax-deferred money. So this is money pre-tax. It grows, but when you take that money out, that's when you have to pay the tax. So not only are you growing your pre-tax money, but also you're growing a tax bill in those tax-deferred accounts. So it's important to understand the different nature or the taxable nature of your current holdings. And too often, when we sit down with clients, we see that they're heavily weighted in tax-deferred money. What they're doing is they're creating a tax bill that they're going to have to face at some point. Either they're going to have to face or their loved ones and beneficiaries will have to face when they're potentially at a higher tax rate than you are in retirement. So it's important to strategize different ways to include tax-deferred or tax-free money in your plan and strategize which tax category to draw your income from to reduce your tax burden. Should you be drawing from your tax-deferred accounts first? Should you be drawing from your tax-free money first? It depends on the situation. Oftentimes, the tax-free money is the last money that we want to draw on because you've already paid the tax, and that could be where the growth comes from in your portfolio. So typically, tax-free is the last area that we draw from. And then we could look at leveraging your qualified money to potentially leave tax-free dollars for your beneficiaries. So if you're really looking at maximizing that legacy, maximizing what you're leaving at the next generation, then we could look at leveraging that qualified, that tax-deferred money so it could be a tax-free benefit to your beneficiaries. An example of this might be looking at if you do have large tax-deferred accounts and you have RMDs, required minimum distributions, coming out, and one of your goals is to leave as much as you can to the next generation, maybe those RMDs go to a life insurance policy so that now not only are you leaving this qualified funds that your kids will have to pay tax on at some point, but now you can leave a source of tax-free funds to pay the tax on those qualified accounts, but also maybe leverage that money so you're leaving more of a bang for a buck for those kids. So those are just some examples of some different kind of tax planning concepts. Understanding the tax diversification is important, just like diversification in your assets. You don't want all of your eggs in one basket when it comes to investing. Likewise, you probably don't want all of your eggs in one basket as it relates to taxes, especially if you think taxes are going to go up in the future. So we've talked about 4 out of the 5 pillars of a sound retirement plan. We've talked about legacy planning. We've talked about income planning. We've talked about investment planning. We've talked about tax planning. And the last part is planning healthcare planning. So planning for healthcare costs and long-term care costs. So it's important to, especially as you're in retirement and at 65, looking at all aspects of Medicare, parts A, B, and D, or Advantage plans. And it's confusing. And it changes every year. So the best plan one year, it might be different the next year. So we do have a Medicare expert that works with our clients, and we'll sit down with them and review these different plans to make sure that you're maximizing that on an annual basis. And then the big thing, and probably one of the most devastating things to a retirement plan, is analyzing your options with regards to long-term care. And we've spent a lot of time on this topic on the show because this is one of, it seems like, our clients' biggest concerns is what happens if I were to have a stroke, if my loved one gets diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia, how am I going to pay for this? In fact, there was a recent USA Today article that said if you're diagnosed with dementia today, the lifetime cost of that could be over $700,000. And so the question is, how in the world are we going to go about paying for this? And we're not just talking about long-term care insurance. There's also legal strategies where we can set up certain types of asset protection trusts to help protect our assets so that we can look at different benefits that are available, things like the veterans benefit, things like Medicaid, as a way to shelter our assets. And this is especially important with married couples, where if one spouse were to be diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, we want to make sure that that sick spouse gets all the care they need, but then also we want to make sure that that healthy spouse isn't completely impoverished having to pay for this care. And we have a variety of different strategies that we utilize when we're taking a look at the long-term care planning. For example, we could set up asset protection trust, where if we think we can make it 5 years before we were to need nursing home care, then 100% of the assets that we moved into that trust would be protected from that nursing home or Medicaid spend down, where we have to spend down $8,000 to $12,000 a month of our assets on nursing home care until Medicaid will come in and pay that cost of care. So that's one strategy. Another strategy, planning ahead, would be looking at asset-based long-term care insurance. Asset-based long-term care insurance. So this is if you have assets, let's say you have $700,000 of IRA money. One of the things we might look at doing is carving out $250,000 of that, still remains pre-tax. You haven't paid any income tax, but now that $250,000 could be leveraged for a $480,000 long-term care benefit. And then if you were to pass away peacefully in your sleep, that long-term care benefit would double as a death benefit. So much better alternative than that pure traditional long-term care insurance. So if you're to need that long-term care and you utilize this asset-based long-term care, that could be maybe $10,000 a month of long-term care benefits going out of this policy, up to $480,000. And then if you're willing to pay an annual premium when you purchase this type of asset-based long-term care, then that long-term care benefit potentially would never run out. So it's a way to leverage your assets to address the long-term care issue. And so I mentioned two ways to kind of pre-plan for this healthcare or long-term care cost. There's also things we can do kind of when we're more of a crisis situation, or even if we were diagnosed with Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or already suffering from some of the frailties of aging. For example, one of the things we're doing for our clients right now, with one of our clients, is she already has a dementia diagnosis, but she's living at home still. Her husband's taking care of her. But one of the things we're looking at doing is utilizing her assets and turning that into an income stream where now if she were to need any type of long-term care, basically 2 activities of daily living. And activities of daily living are basically the first 6 things you do in the morning. You get up out of bed, you get dressed, you go to the bathroom, you take a shower, you take your medications, and you make a meal. So once she needs 2 activities of daily living, then that income that's coming out to her that's guaranteed for her life would actually double for at least a period of time. So if she were to need home care or assisted living or nursing home care, the income coming out of this investment would double to help pay that cost of care. So there are different strategies, kind of depending on where we are, but healthcare planning needs to be part of that process. So the 5 pillars of a sound retirement include legacy planning, so creating your own rule book, income planning, making sure that you have enough income to live on for the rest of your life, investment planning, making sure that your investment plan matches your risk tolerance, tax planning, making sure that you have a strategy and diversification in terms of how your assets are taxed, and then healthcare planning, making sure that you've answered the Medicare question and you have a plan for long-term care. So I hope that was helpful. If you want more information on this type of planning, I invite you to attend one of our weekly workshops where you can visit thechrisberryshow.com to get more information on that. And with that, join me as we get into questions and answers.
If you or a loved one is facing long-term care costs, make sure you talk with certified elder law attorney Chris Berry from the Elder Care Firm, like Sherry Skelton and her family did from Fenton.
My mother has Alzheimer's. My mom just had a regular will. She didn't have anything set up in a trust. And Chris set up a brand new will, and he got everything rolling. Chris has been extremely helpful. My mom would never have gotten my dad's VA benefits if it wasn't for them. Lori, who actually did a lot of the paperwork for the VA, she was like my new best friend. I talked to her probably 2-3 times a week, and we would be on hold together while we were waiting for the VA to pick up. We were approved, and we never would have been able to do that if it wasn't for them. I can't even begin to tell you what he did for my family.
Hello, I'm attorney Chris Berry. The Elder Care Firm is here to help you and your family find solutions. Call us today.
Protect your assets from probate, long-term care costs, the IRS, and get the governmental benefits you deserve. Visit theeldercarefirm.com today or call 810-214-3800.
Welcome back. So we just covered the 5 pillars of a sound retirement plan, and that includes having a legacy plan, which is your rule book, creating your estate plan, having an income plan, ensuring that your expenses can be paid month to month with reliability and predictability for the rest of your life, having an investment plan. So once your income plan is established, creating an investment plan for the remaining assets that you don't need month to month. Tax planning, having a comprehensive strategy to include tax-deferred or tax-free money in your plan. And then healthcare planning, answering the Medicare question and also planning for long-term care, whether you plan ahead or if you're looking at relying on just crisis planning, but having some type of plan. So with those 5 pillars in place, you should have a safe, secure retirement. And if you want more information or if you want to start the process, we recommend you attend one of our workshops. And our workshops, we call it 3 Easy Steps, Plan and Protect Yourself for the Second Half of Life. And we do these about once a week at one of our different locations because we're all about education. That's why we have this show. That's why we've written books. That's why we teach these workshops. And coming up Wednesday, April 10th in Livonia, so Livonia, Wednesday, April 10th at 6 p.m., we'll have one of our workshops. And then actually Thursday, April 11th, so the next day at 2 o'clock in Ann Arbor at our Ann Arbor location. So Ann Arbor on Thursday, April 11th at 2 p.m. and Livonia, Wednesday, April 10th at 6 p.m. And space is limited for those, so if you do want to register, give us a call at 810-355-2584. Again, 810-355-2584. Or you can email us at askchris@thechrisberryshow.com or visit our website, thechrisberryshow.com. Click through and you can register online. So with that, we're going to get into some of our questions and answers. So if you do have a question, feel free to submit it anytime. But our first question is, if a person has a power of attorney on a person that still is right in mind, does the power of attorney inherit the debts of the person? So this question is from Bernie. So she's asking, if a person has a POA on a person that is still in his right mind, does the POA inherit the debts of that person? Well, the answer to this is most likely no. So when you do serve as a power of attorney for someone, and this is a common question that pops up, you're serving as a fiduciary. So you're not taking on that person's assets. You can't just do whatever you want with the money. Likewise, you don't take on their debt either. And this applies whether they're right in mind or not. So if the person is still functioning, you would not be taking on their debt. Likewise, if that person was incapacitated, still you would not be taking on their debt. What you would be taking on would be a fiduciary responsibility to act in that individual's best interest. So in Michigan, ever since, 2012, a financial power of attorney, when you have to sign accepting that role, and when you do, you have to sign something that you understand that you are acting as a fiduciary, meaning you have to act in that individual's best interest. And the word fiduciary, it's an important one also in the financial world, where there's, in terms of financial planning, anyone can call themselves a financial planner. And so it's important to understand the person you're working with, the person you're getting advice from. You should ask whether they truly are a fiduciary. or do they have a suitability standard? Because there's a lot of people giving advice who aren't necessarily on the same side of the table as you. They're not acting as a fiduciary. They just have to sell you something that's suitable. They might be working for what's called a broker-dealer, where they're a sales broker. They're selling you a stock or selling you a mutual fund, versus working with someone who's truly a fiduciary. And so I just think it's funny that we have these people signing on as a power of attorney. They have a fiduciary role, but a lot of people giving financial advice, they don't have a fiduciary role. So sorry for that tangent there, but the term fiduciary these days is a little bit of a loaded topic, especially in the financial world. We are a fiduciary, and you've probably heard of attorney-client privilege and all of that. So understand when we're working with our clients, we're sitting on the same side of the table with them. So next, what is the best investment strategy for money that I've invested in stocks for my children's college payments? And this is a question from Rose. So, Rose, without knowing when college is, I can't necessarily give you advice on it, but I'll tell you my approach is to also, just like what we talked about in the last couple segments, talking about having that investment or income plan. So income plan isn't just about retirement. Income planning is all about when you need to utilize your assets as a source of income. And so I'm kind of in the same boat as you, Rose. I have two young children, 8 and 6. So right now I'm about 10 years out of looking at paying for college education. So with that, the money that I'm saving to pay for my kids' college education should be invested differently than money that's invested for retirement. So one strategy would be to first look at the type of tax diversified asset classes you're utilizing. So I'm always a big fan of tax-free money. Whenever I can have money that grows tax-free, I like that idea. So one of the things would be looking at a 529. So a 529, and each state has its own 529. And then if you invest inside of your state, sometimes you can get some tax breaks on that. So Michigan does have a 529 plan. So one strategy would be to look at investing in that 529 plan in a way that matches your volatility. Now, another thing or another piece with that 529 is to understand that the money is invested in the market, and whether that's good or bad, but the money is in the market. So even if it's in a conservative portfolio inside of that 529, theoretically, you could lose some money there. So another alternative to that 529, or in addition to that 529, maybe you want to look at something like index universal life insurance. So index universal life insurance is money that you can put into a life insurance policy, but it's tied to the index. So you can get tax-free growth inside of there, in addition to the life insurance piece. So the life insurance, if you do have young children, it's something that's important. It should be there. But with this index universal life insurance, depending on how far out college is, you might want to look at a strategy of putting money into a 529 as well as an index universal life. Because with that index universal life, you get the power of indexing. So if the market goes up, you participate on the upside of the market. But if the market goes down, you don't lose anything. So it's a good hedge in terms of market volatility, along with that 529. But really, Rose, to answer your question, I'd have to know kind of what time frame we're planning for college. If it's like a year out or 2 years out, then I'd give you some maybe different advice. But if you're 5-10 years out, then that might be where you want to look at. Next question. How do I set up a trust for my adult children using IRA funds? I have about $500,000 in IRA money, and I want to make sure that my IRAs are protected. So again, this is getting into, like we talked about, legacy planning. So how can I make sure that this money that I've accumulated, that I've saved up, that I've worked so hard for, can be protected and go where it's supposed to go in a way that's protected? And so this is where we would look at a trust, Scott, as you say. A trust is a way to protect that money. Because in Michigan, or not Michigan, in the U.S., we actually had a Supreme Court case called Clark versus Ramaker. And what that Supreme Court case, Clark versus Ramaker, said is that when it becomes an inherited IRA, you don't have the same protections. If a beneficiary goes bankrupt, then that money could be lost. So how can we protect that for the next generation? And then also make sure that we're not leaving the kids a huge tax bill where they have to pay all the taxes at once. So the answer to that is we would look at having a trust set up as the beneficiary of those IRAs. A lot of times we do spouse first, so they can do a spousal rollover, but then we would have the trust as the contingent beneficiary. So a lot of times it would be spouse, then contingent beneficiary. Now, with that trust being a contingent beneficiary, what happens is that when you pass away and your spouse passes away, now the money flows into the trust. And now it's not enough just to have a basic trust. The trust must be set up in a way that it's going to qualify, and this is a legal tax term, it must qualify as what's called a designated beneficiary. So what that means is that the money that is left to the children inside the trust must pass through so that the trust constitutes what's called a designated beneficiary. Because if it does not count as a designated beneficiary, if the trust isn't set up correctly, then that money that you're leaving to the children, that $500,000, all of the tax would have to be paid in 5 years. So basically, you're forcing the children to take out about $100,000 a year for the next 5 years, which could really drive up their income taxes. So you could be harming them from an income tax standpoint. But if the trust is set up properly, then it can trigger or qualify as a designated beneficiary, and then you can stretch out those IRAs. So you might have heard the term of a stretch IRA. Because once you turn 70 and a half, you have to start taking out required minimum distributions. But and then when you pass away, when it becomes an inherited IRA, no matter what the age is, they have to at least start taking out required minimum distributions at whatever their age is. But also they could just take it all at once, which would hike up their marginal tax rates. Or if the trust doesn't qualify as a designated beneficiary, then all the income tax would have to be paid within 5 years. So if the trust is set up properly, then we could have that stretch out so they don't have to pay all the income tax at once, plus all of the principal inside of that trust would be protected. So it wouldn't have to be paid all at once. And then a really cool strategy is that if you name younger people, such as grandchildren, as beneficiaries of IRAs, or even if you have charitable interests, then you can kind of defer the tax or minimize the tax even further. For example, let's say you leave it IRA money to a 5-year-old. Obviously, you'd have someone else serving as a trustee to manage that. But if it's left to a 5-year-old, the required minimum distribution might be so low that the RMD coming out, the interest rate would be higher than the RMD coming out. So maybe 1% has to come out of the IRA, but it earns 3%. Well, that would be pretty cool because now you're basically creating almost like a pension or an annuity for the beneficiary out of that IRA. So there's some advanced strategies regarding IRAs and trusts and who we leave them to. And that's really part of what legacy planning is all about. It's not just about avoiding probate. It's making sure that this money you work so hard for is protected and goes to the people you want in a manner that you want. So we can protect our beneficiaries from things like divorces, unnecessary taxes, lawsuits, etc. And it's all about that legacy plan, creating your own rulebook. And if you want some more information on this, and we do talk about this concept in our workshops, the idea of protecting the legacy, offering a lifetime of asset protection, stretching out those IRAs, then we have 2 workshops coming up, one in Livonia, Wednesday, April 10th at 6 p.m., and then another one Thursday in Ann Arbor at April 11th at 2 p.m. And you can get some more information on that at our website, thechrisberryshow.com. And then if you do want to register, seating is limited, so you have to give us a call or shoot us an email or register right there online. And again, the phone number is 810-355-2584. Next, we'll get into another question here. Should my wife and I put our extra $600 a month towards paying off her vehicle, on which we approximately owe $10,000 at 0%, or open a Roth IRA? And this is from Rob. So Rob asks, should my wife and I put our extra $600 per month towards paying off a vehicle on which we owe approximately $10,000 at 0%, or open up a Roth IRA? Well, it kind of depends, Rob. First, I'd look to see if there's any other debt you have outstanding. But if you're getting a loan at 0% and you know that you're going to be able to pay it off, then you can look at doing other things with that money. And this is where we get into kind of a little bit of a game of interest rate arbitrage, where, okay, if someone's loaned you this money at 0%, can you earn more than that somewhere else? Well, I'd say as long as you're comfortable with that, you could invest in the market and that type of thing. Interesting place we used to see that would be with Social Security. There used to be this strategy where you would take Social Security, government would pay you your Social Security, you could then invest it, and then as long as you paid it back, you could get a higher Social Security rate. So, for example, let's say you take Social Security at 62, you get all these payments. Let's say you invested it, it's done well in the market. If you paid it all back at 70, then you could get that higher Social Security rate. Basically, your Social Security would be 132% of whatever your full retirement age is. But now you've basically gotten an interest-free loan from the government for about 8 years. So the government did away with that a couple of years ago, but it was an interesting little strategy. And kind of similar concept here. It's basically someone's loaned you $10,000. What are you going to do at 0%? Can you earn more than that 0%? Then maybe you look at doing something like a Roth, as long as you're comfortable and you can pay everything off. So something to think about, Rob. So with that, I want to thank everyone for the questions this week. Again, if you have questions, feel free to email us, give us a call anytime. And I think it was important to cover the 5 pillars of a sound retirement plan, talking about income planning, investment planning, tax planning, healthcare planning, as well as legacy planning. And if you want to take the next step and get those concepts or those ideas addressed, then I recommend you attend one of our workshops, or feel free to reach out to us for a free copy of the Bucket Plan book, which is addressing that investment planning and income planning of how we should look at utilizing our assets. And if you do want a free copy, and again, for the first 5 callers, we'll mail out a free copy if you send in your name and address. Feel free to give us a call at 810-355-2584 if you want a free copy of that Bucket Plan, or if you want to register for one of our workshops. And with that, I want everyone to have a great week. Take care, and I'll talk to you next week. Enjoy.
Learn more about Chris Berry and how he can help your family by visiting online at thechrisberryshow.com. That's thechrisberryshow.com. You can also call Chris Berry at 810-355-2584. That's 810-355-2584. This program content reflects the opinions of Chris Berry and his guests, not the elder care firm, Prosperity Capital Advisors, or the C.J. Berry Group, and is subject to change at any time without notice. Content provided herein is for informational purposes only and should not be used or construed as investment or legal advice, or a recommendation regarding the purchase or sale of any security, or to follow any legal or tax strategy. There's no guarantee that the strategist's statements, opinions, or forecasts provided herein will prove to be correct. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Indices are not available for direct investment. Any investor who attempts to mimic the performance of an index would incur fees and expenses which would reduce returns. All investing involves risk, including the potential for loss of principal. There's no guarantee that any investment plan or strategy will be successful. We recommend that you consult with a professional dedicated to your needs. This program is furnished by the Elder Care Firm.
If you or a loved one is facing long-term care costs, make sure you talk with certified elder law attorney Chris Berry from the Elder Care Firm. Here's Elder Care Firm client Bill Dappridge.
My wife has dementia. We decided that we had to put her in the nursing home. Well, naturally, we had to get lawyers, and we went through 3 before we met Mr. Berry. And he's done everything for us. I guess one of those things that kind of sticks in your mind, he says, "I'm your new best friend," which is true. He's really helped a lot. One of my biggest concerns was not to have to sell the house up north, because actually I wouldn't get a penny out of it. It would all went to the state or the nursing home. And Chris says, "Don't worry about it. We'll take care of that." Would I recommend him? Definitely, especially the people there in Brighton, and they've been great.
Hello, I'm attorney Chris Berry. The Elder Care Firm is here to help you and your family find solutions. Call us today.
Protect your assets from probate, long-term care costs, the IRS, and get the governmental benefits you deserve. Visit theeldercarefirm.com today or call 810-214-3800.